the lesson here. So that's interesting. So let's go ahead and we'll get into Sunday's lesson. And so someone has Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 to 5.
There was a time of famine in the land, and when a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab to meet he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was can't say it. Begins with an E. The name of the wife was Naomi, and the mother of the 2 sons were
Mahlon and Chilion. And they were
Euphrates of Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to the cemetery, the country of Moab, and remained there. Then Elimelech, Noah's husband, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took wives of the women of Moab. And the name of the one son was Oprah, and the name of the other was Ruth, and they dwelt with them there about 10 years. And then both Malachi and Chisholm also died, and so the women survived their 2 sons for their husbands.
okay. So what were the hardships that befell Naomi and Ruth, and what caused them? So what were the hardships they had to face? Okay, we started off with famine, and then what happened? Then death. So Naomi's husband dies, her sons get married, then both the sons die, including Ruth's husband would have died. So that's a kind of a whole sort of string of disasters that they had to face here. I mean, sometimes we use the phrase, sometimes, when it rains, it pours. And sometimes in life that does seem to happen. So what caused these disasters? Okay, so as we study, especially the book of Judges, which is just before Ruth, Israel kind of had this pattern that they would start worshiping the idols of the nations around them. God would allow some kind of disaster to befall them. It might be an enemy to invade them. It might be a famine or whatever, until finally they cry out for deliverance, and God raises up a judge, and they all repent and turn back to God. And as long as that judge and that generation are alive, they're good. Next generation comes along, and pretty soon they're back to worshiping the idols of the nations around them, and another disaster happens to them. How does this reflect the situation that the entire human race faces now? So what connections can we see between the experiences of Ruth and Naomi and what people are facing today? Are there problems, difficulties, and things that people face today? So kind of all over the place. And there are some places I haven't kept up exactly, but I'm sure that somewhere in Africa there probably is a famine going on, because it seems like there always is, unfortunately. But famines. Just seen tornadoes, hit St. Louis and some other places here in our state and around the country. So we have weather disasters that happen. What are some other difficulties and things going on in our world right now? What? Oh, the plane. Okay, plane crash.
You're saying what difficulties?
Yeah, problems in the world.
I think what's quite relevant right now is war.
Okay, right. So what particular? Well, there's more than one, of course, but what particular one do you have in mind?
how Israel just attacked Iran, and you're wondering what's going to happen next.
So, Israel. If you haven't been following the news at all this week, Israel bombed sites in Iran connected with their nuclear research and other things, their scientists and things. Iran has fired back some drones and things, and that's the last that I had heard. And it's just kind of, seeing how much back and forth it's going to go, and how much it's going to escalate there. And of course, we're going on in the fourth year of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and there's civil war in Sudan, among others. I mean, I'm sure that there are other, conflicts of, some aren't necessarily, we necessarily call them wars, but there's, strife and stuff all over the world. Any other things that we see going on that causing troubles today? Death of loved ones. Okay. So we see that happening. So therefore, we have something that we can identify with Naomi and Ruth. They were facing some of the same types of issues that we face today. So our the application question down here at the bottom, it says, even after 6,000 years of sin and death, how does the earth still reveal the wonders of God's love and creative power? So our world has been impacted by all the effects of sin, but does that mean everything in this world is just completely awful? Can we still, does it still show us who God is, that there is a loving creator? What are some things in nature, in the world, that show us that?
One of the things that I've noticed is that whenever something bad happens, there's always even just a little bit of good around. And like after the bad happens, whether it's flood, fire, or war, or whatever, that little bit of good starts to kind of seep in, and it starts to recover and starts to just come back, and it's like it's not really fully done or dead or whatever.
Okay. And sometimes doesn't the good stand out all the more in reference to the bad? And like Nancy was sharing, she was there, and like, oh, are you part of the people that are here to help with the tornado recovery? So, a disaster happens, and then people respond, and good things happen. Joseph.
It's good to have that perspective. So when bad things do happen, and obviously we pray about it, that God could bring good out of what is, meant to be evil. I've experienced that myself. It's specifically with the van. If something's happening with them going great, I've got people here that's depending on me, and now something's happening with the van. But pray about it, and ultimately it comes good. Anyways, nature is a great way of seeing the wonderful things that God has for us to enjoy on this earth.
Definitely. Back up here, and then Liesel, you had your hand.
And while he was talking about that, it reminded me of something. It's like all the stuff I was talking about, when war, fires, or whatever happened, a little bit of goodness around kind of comes into it and helps it to relive, to come back. And then that made me think that is like a very, very precise image of who Jesus is, his character. So then I thought about the part where he and his disciples are walking along, and there's a guy, he's like crippled up or whatever. And so they ask him, like, whose sin was it that caused this? His mom, his dad, or whatever? And he tells them basically, neither. This is just an opportunity for God to be glorified, And so it's like whenever, like what you were saying, it helps the good to stand out even more. And when something bad happens, then, you see the character of God in the hearts of the people around it come up, and they volunteer to help give food or shelter, clothes to rebuild and things like that. And it's like, even in those times, even in times of war, and I've seen a lot of videos and pictures of how bad war leaves, places desolated and destroyed and all that. But still, from that, you see the nature and the heart of God start to come alive and awake, and starts to help to regrow and reconcile each other and all that.
Liesel.
Yeah, I was just going to say in nature too, like the stark contrast. I mean, there's a gradual change from summer to fall to winter. You know, like you see it kind of gradually fade away. But between winter and everything is barren and cold to spring when everything like comes to life and you have the beautiful flowers and you have the greenery and everything, it's just it's such a visual representation of God's love and how there's life after you have something that's dark. So, and then just prayer. I don't know. Lately, like we had like a nice prayer night last night, and just how amazing and beautiful it is to see that after you've been scattered and after you've had something dark happen, the the prayer of everyone coming together and gathering back together and loving other people and trusting in God. It's amazing.
So, yeah, there's play off the comment about with asking well who caused was this man's sin or whatever. We live in a world that's impacted by sin in general. And so sometimes especially in, you look at Job's friends and, even right down to the disciples in Jesus' day, they wanted to tie in every individual act of suffering to some individual sin. So in other words, you must have done something wrong for this bad thing to happen to you. But do bad things happen to good people? Yes, because we live in a world that's been impacted by sin. We aren't just because we're a follower of Jesus doesn't mean we're suddenly immune to all the bad things that happen in the world. And Job proves that, definitely. In fact, it was because he was a follower of the Lord that things got so bad for him there for a while. Now, does God bless us? Yes, he does. But he doesn't remove all the bad things that happen in this world. And so there are some Christians who think that, well, if you follow the Lord and you pray the right kind of prayer, then you'll never get sick and you'll never be poor, and basically no bad stuff will ever happen to you. Yeah. Okay. Any other?
Just one more example would be COVID. It was a bad situation, but it made you look at your health,
Yeah.
and work on your immune system. And, there's a lot of good that came out of that as well.
Yeah. So maybe the lesson we take away from all of that is when you start seeing the negative stuff happening, start looking for the good stuff. Look for the silver lining is kind of how we might say it. Let's see. Okay. Now, okay, we got Ruth chapter 2, and it's starting with verse 5 to, I think I went 5 to 12 and 13 to 20. That's how I broke that one up. So someone with Ruth chapter 2, beginning with verse 5.
Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She is the Moabites who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheep behind the harvesters." She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said, "Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get her a drink, for the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about what you have done to your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come."
Okay, and then someone has verses 13 to 20.
Then she said, "Let me find favor in your sight, my lord. For you've comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. Now Boaz said to her at mealtime, Come here and eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her, and she ate and was satisfied and kept some back. And when she rose up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Also, let grain from the bundles fall purposefully for her. Leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening, and beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Then she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. So she brought out and gave to her what she had kept back after she had been satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, Where have you gleaned today? And where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. And Naomi said to her, This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives.
Okay. So why is this section such a pivotal moment in the story? What's so central about this, what's going on here? So, okay, so Ruth goes out and she is gleaning in the field. It turns out to be the field of Boaz. And then she goes, and so he kind of like, hey, only glean my fields. My men won't bother you. And, come drink water when you're thirsty. And so she does that. She gets plenty of grain, goes back and shares it with Naomi. And Naomi's kind of like, oh, where did you glean today? And she says, well, in the field of named Boaz. So Naomi finds out who Ruth has been gleaning from and why was it such good news that she happened to be gleaning in Boaz's field? What was so good about that? Is it just that he was a nice guy? He was a close relative. He was a near of kin here. So why is that important? And the what? Okay, eventually David's going to be born. But why is having a close relative? What was we not think of that in our culture, but back then, what was the importance of the close relative, the one who was of near kin?
They were legally the ones who could redeem back something that had been sold or something that had been lost because of poverty or because of a bad situation, so to speak. Slavery.
And, I think Naomi also wanted to keep Ruth in the family, so she wanted
Okay.
her to marry a close relative.
Okay.
So she wanted
Okay.
her to marry a close relative.
Okay. So in Israelite culture, God had set it up so that, when they came in, land, you could not sell away your family land permanently. Now, if because of poverty you had to sell it, it was only until, you had the 7-year, and then you had the 50-year, the Jubilee. But you could sell yourself, you could sell your property, but it was only for a limited time. And then it was restored back to the family. So it was never permanent. But before then, the one who was near of kin, and sometimes the Hebrew term is goel, is the kinsman redeemer. They could come and redeem you from slavery. They could redeem your property and restore it to you here. And so she realized, yeah, this is a man who's, he's near of kin to us. So he can help us. And so that was an important thing there. Go ahead.
Well, I can't help but notice how many times it was like gleaning, gleaning, gleaning. And so, like, when I looked up the word gleaning, I just thought it was really cool and interesting. Like, it made me think of when the disciples and Jesus spread out the fish and the loaves, and then they collected the 12 baskets. Or like when um, the lady who wouldn't leave Jesus alone, and she's like, well, even the dogs eat from under the table. Like it was a process of collecting the leftovers, you know? And so it was something that you did when you didn't have a right, but yet it was allowed to happen so that there wasn't as much waste, you know? And so it makes me think of the Gentiles and the people that God is like, oh, like, there's just so many stories of how he wants everyone to be saved. He wants everyone to have a part in the gospel.
And in fact, they were instructed that when they reaped their fields, to not reap the corners of their fields and leave that for the poor to come and glean. And I think that's a little side note here, a lesson of sometimes we help people in ways that don't help them, but this was a way that they could still have to go out and work, but it provided an opportunity for them to get collect enough food to keep themselves fed. But they didn't just like walk up to the door and say, here's a bag of grain. No, I haven't reaped this, so you can come and work for it. So it helps preserve dignity and not expecting that someone's just going to give me a handout and types of things. And so God had a system set up that we could probably learn a little bit from in today's society, where everyone thinks that everyone else owes them whatever it is they want. So the to make our sort of connection here between Ruth, the story of Ruth and other, so Boaz is the kinsman redeemer, the one who can redeem, the one who is near of kin. So who is our redeemer?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
This is such a beautiful story of Naomi and Ruth, of what the church and how God takes care of his people. I mean, all through this story, they stuck together and they became strong because they were together, and the Lord took care of them. It's such a beautiful story. There's so much to this story.
There is. So Jesus is our redeemer, but what kind of a redeemer is he? He's our Goel. He is our kinsman redeemer. Because what did Jesus need to do to become our redeemer? He had to become one of us. He had to become a human being so that he was now of close relation to us here. And so how does understanding that the Creator became a part of his own creation and dying for it help us understand our own existence? When you think about Jesus becoming a human being so he could redeem us, what does that do for you? I think that, the idea is, to me, it just, exemplifies so clearly his love for us, that he was, willing to get down in the dirt with us. That he was like, not just saying, I'm up here and, I'll kind of do my thing, whatever I can to save it. No, I'm going to do whatever it takes to save people. So if I have to go down and become one of them, I'm going to become one of them, because they are so important to me. I love them so much that I'm willing to go to whatever extent I need to do to save them. And so that's what it says to me. And so anyone else have any other thoughts?
I just think that's part of the prefigure, the shadow, like that was established from eternity past, so it wasn't just happenstance that just like, well, they have this neat thing where, if you sell yourself, a kinsman can buy you out of it. That was planned, and it pointed to what Jesus would do. So I think it's amazing in that aspect as well.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. One of your relatives states, why does God allow his people to go through trying times like famine and death? What is the point of allowing it to happen? For every Ruth and Naomi, there were thousands who had no benefactor, no one to intercede and save them from hardship and starvation. How would you respond to your relative? So, the story of Ruth turns out good. It's like it has a happy ending. But Does everyone have a happy ending to their problems in this world? No. So how do we answer that?
All I can do is answer from my own experience, and there aren't always happy endings. We live in a world where, the ultimate ending for the world is not going to be a happy ending. But as Christians, we look forward to something better. And in the process of suffering and pain, we realize our dependence on Jesus, and it reminds us to look forward to our happily ever after with him. Things aren't always wonderful, but they will be. And that's we have this hope.
Other thoughts?
I guess I think about where we lay up our treasures. Are we planning on staying here forever in this miserable world, or will it be some kind of deliverance happening?
Okay. So we kind of need to have the long view. I mean, these stories in the Bible, sometimes, we can see they're sort of shortened so that the whole thing gets resolved in the story. But, our story isn't necessarily, we look at one chapter of our story and think, oh, it's all over now. But we have to think, what's the end of the story? And so, Job starts off great. Suddenly disaster strikes. I mean, he loses his children and all of his possessions, everything but his wife, and that wasn't much help there. Just curse God and die, she tells him. And so, and then then his friends show up, and they did good for a while. They just sat there and said nothing. Then they opened their mouths and they started blaming him. And then he, finally has this interaction with God, and the end result is, well, he gets, more of everything, and then he gets more children and stuff, and so it's resolved with a blessing. But if you think of that, that's the whole stream of time and life, that it's, sometimes we get the blessing, the tangible blessing now, sometimes it comes later. And so I think about sometimes when we go and anoint someone who's sick, and we read from James, says, the prayer of faith will raise him up. Well, I believe they will be raised up. But does that mean they're going to be raised up right then, or next week, or at the resurrection? God has promised he will raise them up, but it doesn't necessarily mean, it's not always in the time that we want it. And so we need to keep the long view of things, that, that God will set everything right in the end. And so sometimes it happens a little quicker, and sometimes it's not till the end of time.
Also, something to remember is that sometimes our suffering is not for our ultimate benefit, but for the benefit of others. You think about people in times past who have been treated very poorly for their belief system and maybe have met an untimely end. And God used their lives and their deaths to reach hundreds and thousands of others. And so sometimes our suffering isn't only for our benefit, but it reaches and benefits others.
Okay, let's move on. We're gonna just move on to Esther on Wednesday's lesson here, because I'm kind of watching the time. So someone has Esther 3 verses, beginning with verse 1, and then probably 1 through 7, and then 8 through 14, I believe is how I broke them up. Of Esther 3, should be 1 through. I think you're on Esther. Okay, yeah, no, right now we're Esther chapter 3, 1 through 7, I believe is the. Go ahead.
I've got that. All right. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But his disdain But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast her, that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
Okay, and then someone has verses 8 through 14.
In all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither keep they the king's law, therefore it is not of the king's profit to suffer. If it please the king, let it be written, that they may be destroyed. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasury. And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, and people also do with them as it seems good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. A copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day.
Okay. And then someone has Revelation 12, 14 to 17. It's got that one. Oh, D.
But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness of her to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Okay, and then Revelation 13, 15.
Give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed.
Okay. So what parallels are there between what we see, the story in Esther, and what we see in Revelation? What's going on in both of those?
God's people are under threat of death.
Okay, so they were both threatened with, that there's something that's going to happen, and unless you do this, you're going to be put to death. So there's another parallel. So what was it that Mordecai was refusing to do? Bow down to Haman. And what are God's people going to be refusing to do at the end of time? To worship the image of the beast. And so there's definitely some strong parallels between them there. And so that, very similar to, Mordecai and by extension, the Jewish people there, pointing also to the experience of God's people at the end of time. And so, if you fail in the small things that test your faith, how will you do when the big tests come? What do you think? How do we tend to think about things? Or how does Satan try to get us to think about things? It's no big deal. It's not a big, it's not, it's just a little thing, no big deal. Why put yourself out? Just compromise on this. But what happens when we compromise on the little things?
You will compromise on the big also.
We'll compromise on the big things. We've seen that in the story of Daniel and his friends. They decided, well, we're not gonna, even though all the other, because remember, a lot of Jews had been taken captive, but it was just Daniel and his 3 friends that said, we're not going to eat this food. We're not going to defile ourselves with it. The rest of the Jews were compromising. When in Babylon, do as the Babylonians do, type of was sort of their thinking. And so when we compromise on things that seem small, and Satan tries to make every sin seem small to begin with. Oh, it's no big deal. God doesn't care. Just, why look like a fuddy-duddy? Why not have some fun, whatever, until we do it. And then he turns around and says, oh man, you've blown it now. God can never forgive you for that. And so, but that's all Satan's lies, both ways. Makes it look like nothing and makes it look like everything. But, are there any little sins? No. It's either, we like to grade sins, well, there's little ones. And so usually it's whatever I'm tending to, it's still in my life, those are the little ones. The ones that you're doing, those are the big ones. We like to kind of rank them that way. Joseph.
I was just thinking, can we compromise by conforming to the world? Like not being a peculiar people, where we stand out, do we compromise when we blend in so well that people may not see the difference? Are we afraid of that?
Well, but do we want to be different just for the sake of being different? So, in other words, if we follow God, we will be different. And so, we don't want to compromise to try to look like the world, but we don't need to go out of our way to try to look strange either. If we're following God, we're going to look strange to a certain extent to people. Like, what on earth is up with you people? But and so there's a balance, because there's some people that I've seen, that they're kind of think that, yeah, I've got to be God's peculiar people, so I'm going to make myself look as peculiar as possible. God doesn't call on us to do that.
Would that come natural though? Because with your example, you're saying the person intentionally wanted to be.
I'm saying I've run into people that's kind of their attitude. I'm
Right,
not saying
yeah.
all people that do whatever it might be.
But do you think it would be more of a natural thing that the closer you become to Christ, the more your lifestyle, whatever you do, is going to be less like the world, and so then people will see that.
Yeah, I think. Now let's see. I don't want to.
I think
As let's use an example for from Adventist history, dress reform. And so some people will latch on to a certain statement made by Ellen White at a certain time and think, okay, that's how women must dress. Not ignoring some of her later statements that modified that and stuff. And so, it's kind of like, it's like we've turned it into a uniform. And so, that this is my Adventist uniform that shows that I'm not like the world. And so we don't want to fall into that. Instead of taking the principles and applying them to our situation today. And we're not all going to come up with the same answer in every situation either. That's true, and we have to give each other room and grace to deal with things. And part of it has to do with the heart, and we can't read other people's hearts, and so we don't always know why they're doing things. Sometimes they make it clear, but sometimes we don't. But we're not called upon to be peculiar just for being peculiar's sake. But if we're following God, we will stand out.
I think the peculiar way of what people perceive as being peculiar isn't actually that. To me, it's like if we're saved, we're baptized and all that, and we're living our life in faith of Jesus and everything, we just continue maintaining that life while all the rest of the world gets all weird and crazy and all that, then that's going to cause people to stand out because you're who you are in the Lord, just being you, and then everyone else is going to be all weird and, like having weird beliefs and just things that are gradually turning stranger and further from God. So then just by you standing still in God is going to cause you to stand out from the rest of the world.
Okay. Maybe use another example because we have a number living around us, the Amish. And of course, it depends on which community you go to because, whatever their local bishops decide of, how much conformity with the world is okay, and so some groups will say, well, you can do this, and others say, no, you can't do that. And we'll just look at their dress. I'm not saying anything wrong with being plain dressed, simple dressing, but to say, okay, this particular style of dress, that from, the 1800s or late 1700s, whenever, they first did that, saying, we must keep dressing this way moving forward. And I don't know all the differences, but German Baptists, they dress slightly differently. And it's the women, that they have a little cape. There's like a little cape that they wear and stuff that's different than what the Amish wear. And so that kind of identifies them as German Baptist as opposed to being, Amish and stuff. And so again, it becomes like a uniform, but, there's different things. And so, well, we only use horses. Well, you can use a tractor, but it has to have steel wheels. Or you go to that group down by Norwood, well, you can drive a John Deere. You can't drive a car, but you can drive the John Deere down to the Walmart. And so again, it's like, it sort of becomes man-made when we turn our rules into sort of a man-made list, or trying to lock ourselves into a particular, time where, the rest of society just kind of looks at us. I mean, I have respect for the Amish and that they're willing to live up to their beliefs. I don't necessarily agree with some of their beliefs, but to the most of the world, they're like, oh, how quaint, how strange, and of course, I know Amish aren't looking to get people to become Amish. That's a whole nother issue with their theology. But we want to be we as Adventists, we can fall into that same type of thinking, and by trying to lock ourselves into a particular point in history, and and we confuse just how things happen to be, because at the time we looked like everybody else in the country, but now, we're going to stay here while the rest of the country. Now, again, there are some trends that, no, I don't want to go along with that, but we don't have to ignore all changes in style and whatever over time. I mean, you'd look at, even Ellen White and different ones. I mean, they didn't all look the same throughout their whole life and stuff. I mean, they reflected somewhat the styles of the time, but within reason. I mean, and so there are some things that, well, okay, if it's now the style to wear lots of jewelry and stuff, well, no, I'm not going to do that. But there are things that aren't matters of principle that, we can look to not make ourselves so alien from the world that we can't even connect with them. You go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll try to be really quick. This is a little off subject, but still on subject. I thought it was really interesting too that it said that he would pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who would do the work to bring those into captivity. Well, I looked it up, and there's 100 pieces of silver in 1 talent. And so when you do the math, there's 300,000 pieces of silver versus like the 30 pieces of silver for Jesus.
Oh.
So it's like it's
A multiple.
yeah, it's a multiple of it, which I just thought was interesting.
Okay.
For all of his people is 300,000. For Jesus, it's 30. But it's like one man and all of his people.
Right.
And then I don't know, I just thought it was really cool too that in the story of Esther, he held out the scepter, and it's like the king held out the scepter to the church, to the woman, which represents the church.
Right.
And I just thought it was cool because like Jesus is the ladder, he's the veil, and he's like the scepter that gets held out. That So those are just two things.
And Beth.
Oh, it's just a very short thing. We have to have a standard. Like the Amish people, they have their own. You have to follow what their teaching is. We have our teaching, so we have to follow that, and then you be in a straight way. Whatever you are, Amish or different Buddhas or everything, we have our standard.
Right. We should have standards, but the question is, where do we get our standards? And, sort of amongst the Amish, it's like they've frozen their standards to a certain extent, depending on the community. The more old order, whatever that they are, the more strict that they are on things. But, it's like freezing it. But, there was a time, if you go back far enough in time, they looked just like their neighbors. Because everyone dressed that way. Everyone used it. There weren't nothing but horses. And so everyone did the same thing. So there was a time when they weren't unique and distinct or anything like that for the most part. I mean, not using buttons and, things. I mean, I'm sure that there were a few distinctions, but they didn't stand out that much. Buttons and, things. I mean, I'm sure that there were a few distinctions, but they didn't stand out that much from the society around them. But they froze themselves. That's different than having I could say we have a dynamic standard that, looks at what are the biblical principles and always applying the biblical principles. And but there are some things that aren't issues of principle per se.
It's good to remember the why we do things, the tenets of Christianity. The how we do things can change, but the why we do things doesn't. So sometimes we get stuck on the how we do things and forget the why we do things.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Let's see, where am I? We've done that. Okay. One of your friends states, not everyone can be the most beautiful or the strongest. So not everyone is called to save God's people or do some great thing. So how can I relate to these passages in my life? How would you respond to your friend? So they were saying, I can't be I'm not beautiful or whatever, so I can't be an Esther. So how does the story of Esther relate to me? How might you answer? Well, it'll be by making the connection to God's end time people.
I think you just have to follow the teaching. I'm sitting there since I was born, and I don't know what the teaching is. So it is my friends what they are doing, but because I learned the teaching that I have to follow, and not, stick with it, and then have to see with what God's commandments are.
Okay. So if as we relate it to God's end time, people, the story and stuff, and so while the particulars may not fit with us as God's end time people, we are called to be a commandment keeping people, and that is going to set us up for some difficulties. But ultimately, the King does extend the scepter, and we get saved. And so that's it's like someone said that about the book. Well, I read the end of the book, and we win. And so that's something to always keep in mind as we're studying prophecies and all of these things is we know what the end is for God's people. Our big question is making sure that I'm part of God's people at the end. And if I am, then I'm safe. And, whether Paul said, whether we live or we die, it's all for the Lord. And that's, that the important thing is that, that we're safe and we'll have eternity with Christ in the end. So let's go ahead and bow our heads as we close. Dear Lord, we just thank you for the opportunity to glean some lessons from these lessons today, and just pray that you would help us to each one be found among your people when Jesus returns. We pray in his name. Amen.